Harry, we need to upgrade Ray to speaker. I'm trying to do it, but I'm not succeeding.
We just need to tell that to also.
Yeah, no, normally I should be able to do it.
Ah, okay.
I'm doing it. One moment.
Okay, thanks.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
Ray, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good, very good. But is your video, can you put it on for a moment?
I'd sure like to. Here we go. How about that?
Great. Anil, can you check the sound?
Everything looks good.
Yeah, great. Ray, I have your presentation and I will be showing it.
Okay, good. So
Good,
should
good.
I do anything, or will you take care of everything?
I can speak also.
Oh, okay, I'll do that.
Okay, then great. So we will be online. So you can switch off your camera until you speak, Ray, if you want, and mute
Okay.
yourself. Yeah.
Mr. Harry,
Yes.
one of the panelists, Robert Parents, are still absent. Just I want to.
He will join a bit later, so he will be joining.
All right.
Yeah.
Harry, I'm calling Georgi. I'll let you know.
Yeah. We start in 1 minute.
Coffee chat. Yeah.
A very warm good day to everyone joining us today in this UNECE Resource Management Week 2021, Day 2. Today we have session 3, a workshop on UNFC and UNRMS to support food, water, energy nexus and build back better from COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Harit Tulsidas, and I'm joined by Charlotte Griffiths in welcoming and Oleg Dubinsky in welcoming you to this session today from Geneva. We will be recording this session. This session will have simultaneous interpretation into English, French, and Russian. Please select your channel from the button at the bottom of your screen. All speakers are requested to speak slowly and very clearly so that interpreters could properly translate your words into the respective languages. All participants are also requested to provide your comments, questions, if any, in the chat box. We will try to reply to as many questions as possible during the time that is available to us. If any participant wants to speak, please raise your hand, and depending on the time available, the chair may decide to provide you the floor. You can also provide your comments via email to reserves.energy@un.org. This address will be shared in the chat soon. All presentations and recording will be uploaded to the meeting website soon. Now, I welcome Teresa Ponce de Leo to chair this session and hand over the floor to Teresa. Teresa, please.
Thank you, Harry. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I have the pleasure to share this session for you today. And as Harry said, Teresa Ponce de Leo from Portugal. So I will start with some opening comments. Today, we will hear about a number of activities and case studies to implement UNFC and UNRMS in specific contexts. Integrated energy management and water management under the food, water, energy nexus is a key topic in which the expert group on resource management was active. Given the COVID-19 crisis, we have activities that look into UNFC and UNRMS, promoting sustainable resource management and assuring the supply of critical raw materials. Providing much needed support from micro, small, and medium enterprises under these harsh conditions was also looked into by several projects. These activities are generously funded by the United Nations Development Account and the United Nations regular program of technical cooperation. The European Commission also supports the development of UNFC and UNRMS through extra budgetary funding. We'll begin this session with an overview of the United Nations Development Program and the regular program on technical cooperation support with a presentation delivered by Mr. Oleg Dubinsky, Regional Advisor for Energy at UNECE. This will be followed by a number of case studies and other inputs by the distinguished experts from several countries. Finally, we'll have a keynote presentation on climate change and oil and gas industry, transitioning to a zero carbon world by Robert Keith Perrins, Queensland University of Technology, Australia. We have a very busy program this morning, as you already have heard, and we will do our best to keep the time to stop at 12 sharp. We may, however, run over 15 minutes or so at the maximum. I encourage all of you to stay till the end. So I give the floor to Mr. Oleg Dubinsky that will from now moderate the case studies session, give us a keynote speech and moderate the case study session. So to you, Oleg.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Teresa. I will not call my presentation a keynote speech. It certainly isn't. What it will focus on, and I hope Harry will put up the presentation on screen. It's there. Thank you. So I will talk about the work. Sorry.
Yeah, please continue, Oleg. Yeah,
I continue. Okay, so if there are some noises, I ask again what Harry said. Please keep your microphones off if you are not speaking, so it allows everybody to hear the speaker, the presenter, in this case me. Thank you. So the title of the presentation is United Nations Development Account Projects and Regular Program of Technical Cooperation Activities of Relevance for the Expert Group on Resource Management. Harry, next slide, please. Thank you. So I will speak about several projects and activities that I lead as a regional advisor on energy at the UNECE and at the Sustainable Energy Division. So this slide is on the UNDA project, Integrated Energy and Water Resource Management in support of sustainable development in Southeast Europe and Central Asia. We have 4 beneficiary countries in this project. They are Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Serbia. The activities before 2020 included the assessment of the existing gaps in data collection related to water and energy resources management and monitoring in the project countries, development of guidance and training materials on data collection related to energy and water management and monitoring, and national trainings on data collection. Last year, there were, as you well know, some problems related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what we managed to do last year was developing 4 case studies, one for each of the 4 countries, on the experience of policy development or application of the existing energy and water resources management practices and monitoring. And later today, you will hear from our experts, consultants who developed the case studies in the countries, the main findings and recommendations. The case studies analyze opportunities and challenges in using UNFC for integrated energy and water resource management. And the developed case studies include specific energy projects in coal, uranium, and renewable energy, and associated groundwater resources where appropriate socioeconomic, project feasibility, and confidence in estimates level of knowledge information are known. Quantities, volumes can be classified using United Nations framework classification. Specifically for the case study of Bosnia and Herzegovina, geothermal project Slobomir and groundwater bottling project Vidia are presented and analyzed. For Kazakhstan, projects on uranium deposit and groundwater utilization in South Inkai. For Kyrgyzstan, projects on coal deposit and groundwater resource. And for Serbia, projects on coal deposit Tamnava Westfield and on groundwater in the area of Mountain Zlatibor. Social, economic, and environmental impacts of the development of energy projects and their impact on the groundwater system were analyzed. Now we go to the activities that are planned this year, and this year is the final year of the project, so it's going to be busy, and it already is. We will have the project workshop, in fact, today, now, to share case studies and best practices for energy and water resources management, appropriate to the national circumstances of the 4 countries, and to apply appropriate integrated management and monitoring tools interconnecting energy and water systems. So that is today. We also plan to develop 2 more national case studies because some activities we were not able to implement because of the lack of travel. So we could not spend the funds of the project to bring experts, participants to workshops, for example. Therefore, we have funds available, and our project management unit and the management of the project in New York allowed us to expand the project to 2 more beneficiary countries. So there will be 2 more national case studies developed for Tajikistan and Ukraine. That is in the amendment to the project that was done this month. Harry, next slide, please. I will continue with the plans for 2021. It's developing a background paper and conducting a training workshop on the topic of assuring diverse supply chains, local, regional, and global, for critical raw materials that are needed for a health emergency and for sustained vigilance. That amendment was done last year. It's amendment directly related to COVID-19, and we will implement this year. So for this, there will be analysis of the status of supply of critical raw materials in the 4 original beneficiary countries, that is Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Serbia. Options for expanding and diversifying supply chains for critical raw materials needed for health emergencies, and preparedness for future health emergencies. Next activity planned is developing guidelines on mine closure, remediation, land value capture, water management, and repurposing, with special reference to the beneficiary countries in the post-COVID-19 green recovery. And we will have a presentation today from Ray Pilcher that we can say that would be a kickoff for this activity. This is also in the amendment to the project of this month. Next, we will develop policy recommendations, or rather our national and international consultants will do it, for integrated energy and water resources management applicable nationally, taking into account the particularities of the countries and recommendations regarding the transboundary aspects. So these policy recommendations for now 6 beneficiary countries, so including Tajikistan and Ukraine, will be further submitted for the governmental approval and inclusion into relevant governmental strategies for further implementation. Policy recommendations will identify best practices, measures, and procedures relevant to energy and water issues, with a particular focus on the cross-cutting nature of energy and water management. And we plan to conduct a final workshop to present, discuss, and validate the policy recommendations for sustainable energy and water resources management for each beneficiary country, and disseminate the project results to other countries in Central Asia and Southeastern and Eastern Europe. At the moment, we cannot say whether it will be an in-person or online workshop, some type of high workshop. We simply don't know what duration will be closer to the year, so I will not try to second guess at the moment. So these are our plans for this UNDA project. Next slide, please. Thank you. I will speak now about the UNDA project global initiative towards post-COVID-19 resurgence of the micro, small, and medium enterprises sector. Again, at the top of the page, you see the project website. The project started last year in response to the COVID-19 crisis. And last year and in early 2021, we have implemented the following activities on the topic of relevance to this group. Guidelines and best practices for MSMEs to assure resiliency and progress towards a circular economy in sustainable resource management and critical raw material supply solutions have been developed by consultant Michael Hashke. And based on that, and taking into account the specifics of the countries, we have selected 2 pilot countries, Tajikistan and Ukraine, for which customized guidelines and best practices for MSMEs have been developed. We have one activity for Ukraine is completed now. We have the guidelines and best practices for MSMEs for Ukraine posted on our website in 2 languages, English and Ukrainian. And we also had the training workshop in Ukrainian for the country. We also had a regional workshop on the regional study. For Tajikistan, the guidelines and best practices are also almost ready, and we will have the training workshop in the coming months. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is just the cover page of the guidelines and best practices for MSMEs. That's the regional study. Next slide. Here are the activities that we plan to have in 2021. With the COVID-19 crisis developing fast, and we see what is happening and how countries react, how economies react, it is important to update the guidelines and best practices, the regional study that we had. So we are now in phase 3 of the project, and we will have these updated guidelines and best practices. We will also have customized guidelines and best practices for 4 more UNECE member states. And as you see, they are those member states that participate in the other UNDA project: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Serbia. We will have national training workshops for these 4 countries. And we also will have a regional workshop on exchange of experience in implementing guidelines and best practices for MSMEs to assure resiliency and progress towards a circular economy in sustainable resource management and critical raw material supply chain solutions. Next slide, please. A very interesting study that we have done last year, also as a response to COVID-19 crisis: women entrepreneurship in natural resource management, challenges and opportunities for the MSME sector in the post-COVID-19 socioeconomic recovery. The report is available on our website. This was done in response to a request from Kyrgyzstan, and this is funded from the Regular Program on Technical Cooperation, or RPTC. It also includes case studies of 5 countries: Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. You see the workshop website here. On the study, on the report, our consultant, Ms. Kankana Dubi, has presented at this training workshop. You can hear and see the recording, and you can also see the presentation. And you will hear more from her on Thursday. She will participate in one of our sessions this week. Next slide, please. And that is the final slide. I would like to thank you. If you have questions, my suggestion is please put them in the chat, and we will monitor it, and I will try to respond to them. But right now, without further ado, I would like to now put on my hat as a moderator of this session, and we will start presentation of the case studies developed last year. And we will start with Mr. Boban Jolovic, Head of Department for GIS, Geological Survey of Republic of Srpska, Bosnia and Herzegovina. His presentation will be on application of UNFC to energy and groundwater resources in the Republic of Srpska, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you. And Mr. Jolovic, the floor is yours. I would like to remind you that every speaker has up to 10 minutes. So it would be very much appreciated if you stick to this time frame. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleg. I will try to take the time and and give my impression about the practically first official application of the UNFC in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2 case studies, one related with energy, or more precise is with renewable geothermal energy, and the second one of groundwater. Why I decide to give just this geothermal project explanation is that in this project we have both components, the energy and the water, and it's more practical to talk in detail about this one, taking into account that thermal water is something similar like fresh groundwater. Can I share my screen with you and control my slides? Or
yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, I
share.
will. Yes. You can see this correctly?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. As you probably know, the Bosnia and Herzegovina is quite complete country regarding the administrative organization, but in gist, there are 2 key units, called entities. The one is Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and second, the Republic of Srpska, which share about 50% of the Bosnian territory. What is most important to say in this moment is that mineral politics is quite independent and responsibilities are on entities. There is no state ministry responsible for the mineral resources. Also, there is no any national strategy about the use of mineral resources. Furthermore, there is no state geological surveys. All these things, in accordance with the constitution, are in responsibilities of the entities. It is very important mentioned to understand Bosnian mineral resources politics. Very briefly, key mineral resources exploited today are in the first order coal, brown coal and lignite, and it will stay in tension in next 10 years. There are also important production of iron, bauxite, lead and zinc with the companion minerals like copper, gold and silver. And what is maybe more important this moment that here is a serious potential in lithium and borates, also in the nickel and cobalt and antimony. As you probably know, very close to Bosnian border in Serbia is triggered a world-class lithium project led by Rio Tinto, and very close, just on the another side, in Bosnian side, there are very intensive explorations at the lithium in this moment, and we can suppose that it will be driving force of the mineral resources exploration in the next 10 years. Bosnia use very similar like Serbia and Montenegro and another countries in the region, some kind of old Russian classification, former Russia classification. You can see it when you see this A, B, C1 and C2. But in Bosnia, a good thing is that in 2013, for the first time in some legal document, UNFC is mentioned. If you look in this picture left, you will find under paragraph 2 in row 2 term UNFC. That's a good thing. A bad thing is that here in this paragraph we have bad interpretation of the UNFC classification. These terms proved reserves for the A and the B, and the probable reserves for C1 more correspond to the CRISCO classification. But I repeat once time again that good thing is that people in the ministry and the local and the legal policy makers recognized this kind of the classification.
Boban, one moment. Can you bring your speaker a little closer to your mouth, because there is some problem in hearing?
Do you hear me? Is this better?
Yeah, that is better. Thank
you. Sorry, I will take this one. As you probably know, like in other countries, all these categories are related with some acceptable errors. Of course, for the A category, you have just 50% of acceptable error and 30% for B category and 50% for the C1 category. If you look in some report or the elaborate on mineral resources and its classification, in that document you can find many elements which are projected in these three axes of the UNFC classification. For the example, A, B, and C1 categories are classified based on geological knowledge. One of the criteria is geological knowledge, and it could be projected on this G axis. On the other side, there is very complex technical and economic analysis, which put elements for social economic viability estimation, but also ecological aspects and the list of given permits. What is most important to estimate the project feasibility or F-axis of the UNFC classification. And that's more or less case in all classifications of mineral resources in the country. In this case, I choose one very interesting energy product based on geothermal energy, where primary product is heat. They're also very ambitious.
From who? From Lydia? Yeah.
Another projects related with aqua park, greenhouse food and herbs production, and so on. The temperature of the water of boreholes is 72 degrees, and the project lifetime is estimated till the end of the concession contracts is 2036. This project also triggered many very interesting economical aspects, like head office of one bank. There is located university, sport and recreation complex, and all these things are practically triggered by geothermal energy production. Infrastructure is very improved in last 10 years in this area because the project one very nice bridge with the Republic of Serbia is constructed, many paved roads and so on. And what is also, from my point of view, is essential is that this aquifer is considered as transboundary with the Serbia. It's in line with some things Oleg mentioned in his presentation, that in the future we can consider application of the UNFC on both sides in Serbia and Bosnia, and maybe consider how different experts see these projects. Regarding the environmental issues, it's clear that this project is a project of low CO2 emission. Consequently, it's in line with the Kyoto Protocol, Earth Summit in Johannesburg, also with the newest climate agreement signed by participants in the World Conference in Paris in 2019. It's in line with the national strategies, and the resource give opportunity to develop many other projects. Briefly, if we look into all these previously mentioned things, we can conclude that environmentally, fossil energy in the heat sector will be substituted by renewable energy. It's very good because we expect low CO2 emission, which is applied here as technology, and these have very positive and quantified effects on reduction of coal consumptions. Socially, it will have aftermaths in clean energy, which will provide better residential conditions for the people here. Also, project trigger serious employment, new technologies are applied, and conditions for thermal water-based recreation and spa activities. This project, as I mentioned, is foreseen for the next 60 years because it is a period of valid concession contract. Regarding the technology, you can see some pictures, and that really modern technologies applied here. Well is deep 1.8 kilometers. On the second picture, you see very modern heat plant, and on the figure right, see one of the numerous sub-surface installations used for the amplification of the residential buildings of the bank, of the university, future aqua park, and so on. It is the reason why I put this axis in F1. Also, in addition, is clear that all licenses are available, like, for the example, environmental study is verified by the responsible ministry, thermal water reserves verified by the Ministry of Energy and Mining, license for construction and special planning are in field, and the water permit is issued by the institution responsible for the water management. I mentioned it that concession contract is valid up to 2036, and it's the reason why I calculate the energy reserves for the period for the next 60 years in continuation. I don't want to talk too much about geology, but it's one of the most explored areas in the region, because in the area of 2,000 square kilometers, we have more than 5 deep boreholes. Each of the boreholes is deeper 1.3 kilometers, and for our conditions, it's really great. Here is estimation of the reserves. The highest percent and probability of 99 is taken from the history of the exploration. It's about 5 liters, for example, per second, and based on the long-term abstractions. The next level of A reserves in accordance with the rule book is estimated the probability 85%. After that, 70% for B. You can see this.
Boban,
Yeah.
I have to remind you of the time limits.
Yeah. I will go briefly in this table because the project provides conditions to prescribe to explain the present project, but also to give this classification of potential future projects. Present project is classified as E1.1, F1.1, and G1, but there are also potential projects where the E axis is estimated as E2 based on the probability of the reserves. G axis are estimated as G1, G2, and G3, and so on. This is the first example of the mapping scheme. I discussed this with colleague Vukas from Serbia, and in the first 3 rows you have the official national classification, potential new classification, what is most close to CRISCO classification, and after that UNFC. And on the bottom picture you can find just national classification and UNFC. Same things is prepared for the groundwater. And this mapping scheme will be probably a start point for the negotiation with the experts and the legal policy makers in the future about the application of the UNFC in national legal policy. Also, there are some touched development goals, like good health and well-being, clear water, affordable energy, sustainable cities and communities, climate actions. And last slide about recommendation for the future actions here from the plan which present Oleg at in his presentation. I find that he also touched some things like inclusion of small countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina in process of the bridging of the national classification with UNFC. Maybe consider a regional approach, because the countries like Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, and other former Yugoslav countries more or less have same principle of the classification on mineral resources based on the former Russian. And these regional trainings and national trainings will be crucial for the national decision makers and policy makers to seriously consider this classification as one very important for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jolovic. A very interesting presentation and very good case study. Also, very concrete examples of application of UNFC in Republic of Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I would now give the floor to Mr. Georgi Freiman from Kazakhstan. He is the chairman of the Executive Committee of Public Association.
Sorry, Oleg Radoslav Ukas.
Oh, sorry. That's my bad. I missed Radoslav. We go, yeah, I was thinking of doing it in alphabetical order. My apologies. The next speaker will be Radoslav Vukas, UNECE consultant from Serbia. He will speak on integrated energy with specifically coal and water resources, groundwater management in Serbia, and use of UNFC. Radoslav, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Oleg. Dear colleague, good morning, everyone. In front of you, I show some results of a case study, integrated energy and water resources management in Serbia to using UNFC system. In this picture, I show some one project called Basin. This is a yellow part of central part of Serbia, maybe about southwest from Belgrade, capital town of Serbia, called Basin, where is situated Tamnava West field called deposit or open pit. And the other project subject of this case study is Zlatibor Mountain, blue color in the south part of Belgrade, maybe about 300 kilometers. The first project, energy resource or coal deposit, Tamna West field, the first time in this Serbia, we concrete implemented social economic data or A-axis UNFC in national system. In this slide, you know about category ABC geology reserves or balance reserves, and the balance reserve ABC category of the coal deposits in national system corresponded in E1 UNFC system. Outbalance corresponded to E2 system of UNFC system definition, because in this moment we need some future technical prepared documentation or other necessary documentation prepared from this category to change to balance reserves. Other F-axis feasibility, if we talk about balance reserves ABC category in F1 UNFC system, because coal basin is more than decades from mining activities, which prepare many studies, many documents, many permits, and everything is proved. But outbalance ABC category in this moment is in F2 in UNFC definition, because this is technical documentation must subject to further evaluation further. And G-axis. Many times we talk about ABC category, like in the preview presentation, because we use the old rule book from ex-Yugoslavia, and in this moment, G-axis only balance category A plus B is G1 category, but balance C category is G2 category, because some difference level of confidence A, B, C category. In this moment, balance C1 category must be G1 because is maybe a low or moderate level of confidence by low regulation. And finally, in the Coal West field, in this moment, I show some graphic presentation of this coal deposit with A, B, C category in the class of UNFC system, and some status of this project. This project several decades in exploitation field, but this is no renewable energy resource. This is hard mineral raw materials, and I think in next 5 years maybe some finished exploitation in this field or open pit. Second subject project, water resource or groundwater in the mountain Zlatibor area. When we processed this data about some project with different type of hydro potential, some drill hole on some springs on the different type, we talk about A-axis only about state permit and other documents. In this case, ABC category of groundwater project correspondent to E1, but for project Kraljeva Voda, King Waters water, and the other case, ABC category correspondent with A11, because in this moment, for this project we haven't not have all permits all because management of energy and water resources is complex process and is distributed in the several ministry or sectors. This is very hardly for some implementation our system in a national system, UNFC system on other system, because maybe in the case when we talk about water, only data about the quantity we have in one ministry, maybe some mining and energy, other environmental protection and agriculture and other ministries, we have maybe some need to approve to some permit for exploitation by law. It's a problem. F-axis of category UNFC definition, ABC category national system, groundwater project, Kraljeva Voda or King Spring, ABC category correspondent to F1, but ABC category other subject project, some drill hole correspondent to F11, because in this moment owner haven't all permit for legal exploitation in this water. And when we explain about that in the case study, very detailed. And Mountain Zlatibor area and groundwater project in UNFC system, I show some map with some springs in the Mountain Zlatibor. This is a touristic center and some need some fresh water, some other water from maybe thermal water and the thermal plant. And this groundwater project total I show in this table with about results from salt and using in this case what is valuable project, and this project in exactly assessment. And finally, some conclusion about short presentation, because very detailed data of this case study you must see in the case study link, that some must talk maybe several phrases about that, that Serbia has huge geological mining potential, but good geology tradition, mining activities, but some legal law regulation distributed as different ministries. It's a problem maybe in this moment, because we haven't any decision about use the UNFC system or other system. In this moment, we prepare some law amendment and of law on mining and geology exploration in Serbia. I think they start next this month. And this case study prepare in the actual pandemic COVID-19 pandemic, and if you assessment about that impact to this project, it's a high level of impact in A-axis and some lesser impact on F-axis in this subject project, in this case study. And finally, thank you very much for your attention. And большое спасибо для внимания.
Thank you, Radoslav. Thank you very much, and thank you also for keeping the time. We are a little bit behind, so we will not go for any questions at the moment. And now, with my apologies, we will go to Mr. Georgi Freiman, who is the chairman of the Executive Committee, Public Association of Independent Subsoil Experts of Kazakhstan. Georgi will present the case study on the application of UNFC in energy and water resources in Kazakhstan. Georgi, the floor is yours.
Hello, dear colleague. I want to tell you about the main results of the pilot project case study of the application of UNFC in energy and water resources in Kazakhstan. Please, next slide. The system for assessing resources and mineral reserves in force in Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, for the classification of reserves and resources of solid minerals, energy, raw materials, and groundwater, the GKZ state local system operates. Also, since 2018, in Kazakhstan, the code Kazrc, developed in accordance with the Kyrgyzstan template, has been operating in parallel.
Georgi, you are muted. Can you unmute and speak? You became muted.
Sorry?
Yeah, you
Yes,
became
okay.
muted. Yeah.
Yes. On this slide, we see approximate ratio of resources and reserves according to Kyrgyzstan template, UNFC, and GKZ, Republic of Kazakhstan. On the left part, we see Kyrgyzstan template, mineral reserves proved probably, who corresponds with UNFC categories as E1, F1, G1, and 2. And UNFC class viable project. For GKZ RK, these categories as A, B, B, and C1. The mineral resources of Kyrgyzstan measured, indicated, and inferred as corresponds UNFC categories as E2, F2, G1, G2, G3, and UNFC class potential viable projects. And of GKZ categories as B, C1, C1, C2. And on down this table, exploration results of Kyrgyzstan as E3, F3, G4, and as UNFC class prospective projects of GKZ RK categories as C2 and prospective resources P1, P2, and P3. The most problem of GKZ is the fact that the categories B and C are equivalent to both for resources and reserves, according to Kyrgyzstan. Please, next slide, Harry. Object of the case study. In accordance with the objectives of the projects, the southern kind uranium deposits of the roll front type located in South Kazakhstan, and the groundwater deposits combined with it in the subsoil the explored area for water supply to the Taikonir village and production facilities of the Southern Kai mine were taken as the object of research. In the area of the uranium deposit, no source of surface water suitable for use has been found. Therefore, groundwater is the only source of water supply. Please, next slide. Uranium resources of Kazakhstan, base characterized. The total identified uranium resources responsibly used and inferred as of 1st January 2017 amounted to 10.65 million tons of uranium metal. Kazakhstan ranks second in reserves, 1.7 million tons after Australia, and first in production, about 40,000 tons. This situation is ensured thanks to the unique uranium ore province, which is located in South Kazakhstan. The deposits in which are of the roll front deposits, which are processed by the in situ leach methods. Please, second slide. Water resources of Kazakhstan. The total resources of surface water of Kazakhstan are estimated at an average of 100.8 cubic kilometers a year, of which 56.8 cubic kilometers are found in Kazakhstan, and 14.3.9 cubic kilometers come from adjacent territories. The provision of local surface water resources per inhabitant is very low. Only 3.2 thousand cubic meters a year. For comparison, in Russia, there are 27.8 thousand cubic meters a year per one inhabitant, and Kyrgyzstan 12.7 thousand cubic meters a year. With a large deficit of surface water, the total groundwater resources are 64.3 cubic kilometer a year and 14.4 cubic kilometer a year, and them are fresh water. Groundwater, which is essential, is under-utilized. That it is quite obvious that it is the widespread use of groundwater that can guarantee all the countries' need for water resources. Please, second slide. The urgency of the problem. For the semi-desert South Kazakhstan, on the territory of which Unifc Uranium province is located, where dozens of mines operate, the issue of water supply is very urgent. This example shows the effective use of groundwater with is widespread in the subsoil together with uranium mineralization to supply fresh water to the population of the village and mine personnel and process water to the production process of the South in-kind mine. Please, next slide. South in-kind uranium deposits. Uranium resources and reserves of the South in-kind deposit were estimated in 2018 in accordance with the NI 43 1.101 for submission of the Toronto Stock Exchange. Report CSA Global PTI Ltd 2018 for Uranium 1 Incorporated. The assessment of groundwater reserves was carried out in accordance with the requirements of the State Reserves Committee of the Kazakhstan. Please, second slide. South in-kind mineral resources and mineral reserves, Kyrgyzstan and UNFC categories correlation. On the left, we see categories of Kyrgyzstan and category UNFC, resources estimated, measured, indicated, inferred, and the reserves proven and probably. Of category UNFC, E2 F2G1, E2 F2G2, and E3 F2G3.
Georgi, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Would it be possible for you to finish in about 2 minutes? We are late.
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
yes,
Thank you.
Thank you. Conversion of mineral resources and mineral reserves according to the NI 43 101 standard into the UNFC was made on the basic bridging document between Kyrgyzstan and the UNFC. Please, next slide. We see on this slides summary of resources of the groundwater by categories according to the GKZ standard. Please, second slide. Classification of groundwater southern Kai deposits in accordance with UNFC 2019. Two classes, viable project and potentially viable projects, and the amount we see in the right of this table. Please, second slide. Social, environmental, economic viability and impact assessment. The long-term profitable mining and processing of uranium or the southern Kai deposits, as well as the strategic plan calculated until 2045 to continue the profitable operation of the enterprise, festivals to the economic and socio-ecological viability of the project. When mining and processing radioactive uranium ores environmental safety issues are the particular importance. For this reason, government and subsoil use pay great attention to the environmental safety of production and health protection of the production personnel in the local population. In accordance with the environmental and water codes of Kazakhstan, before the start of the development of the southern Kai field, all necessary studies were carried out. Please, next slide.
Dear Georgi, we need to finish. 1 more minute and that's it, please.
Sorry. Next slide, please. An important task of the development of the mineral resources complex of Kazakhstan is to increase the resource base of solid minerals and hydrocarbons. UNFC can create the most favorable condition for investors. A limitation in the use of the UNFC include the need for significant adjustment of national legislation for both in Kazakhstan and in other countries. And this process, as you know, always happens very slow. The legal provision existing in Kazakhstan today enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of Kazakhstan speak of the ownership of minerals described as the property of the people. Therefore, for implementation of the UNFC, it is also necessary of developing mechanisms of state control in this area. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Georgi. My apologies to you for having to limit the time available, but we are constrained by time, and my apologies. I also see there are quite a few very interesting questions in the chat. Maybe our presenters, our speakers, could see if they can respond to some of them in the chat, because we may not have time for question and answer session discussion after this session, again, because of the time limits. Now, the next speaker is a colleague from Kyrgyzstan, Mr. Arkady Rogalsky. He is the executive director of the Kyrgyz Society of Subsoil Experts, and he will speak about the application of UNFC to energy and mineral resources in Kyrgyzstan. Arkady, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much for making this presentation. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Boban. It was very interesting and useful presentation, and I think that questions which were raised in this in his presentation is very valuable for us. We need to build something bridging document, not between Kyrgyzstan and UNFC, but maybe between JKZ systems of the former Soviet Union and to UNFC, because it will be easier for everybody to work with this. And about Kyrgyzstan, first of all, I want to explain you that Kyrgyzstan is a small country, small mountainous country, which is situated in the middle of the Central Asia. It is absolutely landlocked by 4 different countries, and about 70% of the whole territory is high mountains with the limited of any kind of household activities. In the Kyrgyzstan, we have about 10,000 different mineral occurrences, of which only 2,000 which can be estimated as fields or any kind of which can make any kind of commercial effects. But if mining is not so big, but it's get about 22% of whole global domestic products. It makes 37% of direct foreign investments and 55% of total industry. But if we will include in mining production all the metals and refraction of the metals, it makes about 80% of the whole global domestic product is just only mining and around areas. The biggest problem in the Kyrgyzstan in the mining is investments. And this slide, I want to show you comparison of investments of different countries where mining is the same of the high level. And you see that Kyrgyzstan exploration coverage, it looks like high. It's about $325 per square kilometers. But it's become lower and lower from year to year. To improve the situation, currently in Kyrgyzstan, we try to make positive investment climate, minimization of negative impact of locals and environmental, and to attract foreign investments. To do this, we have 4 problems. First of all, it's state reserve balance, which based on the Soviet Union GGG system, which have some limits to attract the investments. That's why we decided to build the Bureaucracy standard based on Kyrgyzstan template, which has a bridging document with UNFC, based on which we plan to make more investment attractive country. Second problem is bureaucracy, which we plan to solve building mining code. First talks about mining code in Kyrgyzstan starts 2020. It's so already for 9 years. We have only talks about this, and currently we are in active stage of creating mining code. And it looks like that in the 2 months, it already will be presented for the everybody who are interested in the mining code. Third question is market of subsoil rights, because in Kyrgyzstan we have a very liberated market of subsoil rights, which sometimes not affect to positive government to make any kind of positives for the government, because licenses are holding for the years without any activities. We decided to include stock exchange based on currency standard, which can help companies to attract investment using different mechanisms, not only simple shares, and options and IPOs, but using blockchains, maybe using some crowdfunding and other related issues. Fourth question is mining policy procedures. First of all, what we need to do in this stage is support of existing companies. We need to make all our best to show companies who are already active in Kyrgyzstan that they can be active again. 5 questions: recultivation. Currently is the responsibility of the companies, but companies as usual don't like to do it. That's why we want to make that local authorities will be responsible for this. We build a special financing instruments called recultivation bank accounts, which owned by local authorities, but which cannot be used. Which can be used by local authorities only after the company abandoned the license and gone away. And only this, in this case, local authorities started recultivation procedures according to their needs. And the fourth question is illegal mining. First of all, it's for the small, medium, and artisanal gold miners. We want to build facilitation of mining procedures for them using online schemes of providing the licenses and to make them easy to work. Currently, this project is already active for raw materials. So small and medium companies can receive raw materials licenses, but not online currently, but using local authorities administrations. In future, in 2 months, they will already do it using online instruments. On this slide, I want to explain you what the difference between KGZ and Kyrgyzstan and UNRMS, but I think that previous presenters do it much better. And the next step, which we are very interested to work with the UNRMS in Kyrgyzstan, is about anti-uranium hysteria. Because in the end of the 2019, it was adopted anti-uranium law in the Kyrgyz Republic. Using this law, all kinds of exploration, production, processing, and other related to uranium or radioactive materials in Kyrgyzstan become illegal. So nobody can work anymore with the uranium and any kind of radioactive materials. Professional sector of the Kyrgyzstan, of the Geological Society, make all their best to explain to the decision makers that this is very destroying document of the Kyrgyzstan, because uranium is everywhere in the Kyrgyzstan. And currently we have built the pool of the beneficiaries who are interested to start exploration, production, processing of uranium in Kyrgyzstan again. And I've presented them UNRMS and the application about the role of nuclear energy and sustainable development, the 2 United Nations documents. And it looks like that after adopting mining code, we try to make a study just about uranium in Kyrgyzstan. And maybe we can do this study ourselves, maybe with some comments and advice and support from the UNECE to change position of decision makers and first of all local activities. I think that we have very little time. That's why I want to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I will easily. I can answer questions. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you very much, Arkady. That was a very good presentation, and thank you for keeping the time limits. We are short on time. With the questions and answers, again, I would like to suggest to our speakers, please look at the chat. And if you see a question that is directed to you, try to respond in writing in the chat. Thank you. I would also like to mention that we had a case study on the application of UNFC to energy and water resources of Kyrgyzstan, developed by the national consultant from Kyrgyzstan, Ms. Zinaida Shabalotova. She is unfortunately not available today for this session, but I encourage you to go to our website and look at the case study. Thank you, and I would like to thank Zinaida for her work. The next presentation, still under this part of the session, will be by Mr. Ray Pilcher. He is the president of Raven Ridge Resources, and he's also the chair of another UNECE group of experts on coal mine methane, and he is also our champion of just transition. He will speak about mine site restoration, environmental legacies, and land repurposing. And I believe water management will also be part of his presentation. Ray, the floor is yours. And again, you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oleg, and thanks to everyone else in for this opportunity to speak. I really enjoyed the previous speakers' presentations, and yes, indeed, I will talk a little bit about water management as well. Next slide, please. When we look at coal production and consumption by region, this is work that's been done by the International Energy Agency. We see the coal mining in the OECD countries are generally declining. Coal mining and use are growing in the Asia Pacific, and that mines that close must undergo environmental restoration and mine land repurposing if we really want to look at the opportunity for sustainable development and resource management. We have to address all of these issues. Next slide, please. Because I'm chair of the group of experts on coal mine methane, I would be remiss without talking a little bit about methane, but we won't talk very much. Coal mining is responsible for approximately 9% of the anthropogenic methane that's released annually on this planet. Uneven methane emissions reporting from the coal sector is an ongoing problem in the UNECE region. We see everything from tier 1 to tier 3 estimates of methane emissions. But as I say, this is uneven, and there's a need for tightening up the reporting that's being done on a yearly basis for the inventories. And of course, this impacts the NDCs that each country is required under the Paris Accord to develop. More reliable information is developing, we hope, and it's really important to have these developed, because this is required if we're going to determine what the funding requirements are for a just transition. Next slide, please. Work that was done in 2019, led by my colleagues at Pacific Northwest National Laboratories in the United States, and some of the rest of us from private sector and other organizations, and sponsored by the US EPA, showed that actually we have a looming problem. As we close coal mines through their life cycle, we actually end up in areas where there are gassy coal mines, yielding not a gassy active mine any longer, but a coal mine that's closed but will leak methane to the environment, really regardless of what we do, because underground mining in particular fractures the subsurface, causes subsidence, connects with man-made conduits as well as naturally existing conduits, and essentially you have a leaky system that, until the mine is flooded, if it floods, there will be continued abandoned mine methane emissions. The EGRM has initiated work on coal-associated gas resources classification. This is in its beginning stages. It's very important for us to address because we also not only have to look at this as a resource, we have to be aware that methane is a very serious climate pollutant. And so those resources that aren't actively being used must be recognized as something that's very serious and something that has to be addressed. Next slide, please. When we talk about other legacies associated with deep underground mining, we'd be remiss if we don't talk about water issues. And certainly you saw in the previous discussions that it's not just coal mining. When we look at the discussion related to uranium mining, we see that there's also a need to be considering what the impact will be on water problems, and management of that is very, very important if we're going to look forward to sustainable development, but also a just transition as these mines are closed and land is repurposed and there are other opportunities developed for the workforce and the local communities. France and Germany have some serious water problems that are legacies from decades of mining in the Ruhr and Lorraine-Saar coal regions. Some of the mining in these areas go back at least 150 years, and in some cases even further back than that. I think Germany is engaged in battling sort of a world-class water incursion in the Ruhr coal mines. The last coal mine in the Ruhr area was closed in 2018, but water that flows from the mine workings threaten to contaminate the surface water and the aquifers overlying the deep mines in the region. This is one of these push and pull kind of problems. Certainly, as the groundwater starts to rebound after decades of mine activity, which included a lot of aggressive pumping to keep the mines dry, the water is rising in the shaft. This water has been in contamination or been contaminated by contact with these open workings. And so we have water that may be saline in its natural state from those lower lying sources of water resources, but it also is bringing up other unwanted contaminants. At the same time, because these areas also experience, thankfully, a lot of water that atmospheric water in the form of rain and snow. So you have water that's moving up from the deep underground and water that comes down from the surface. And so there are sort of parallel water pumping systems, some of which pump the rising mine water down so that it doesn't come up and become in contact with aquifers, and then pumping water out of the mines that flow in from the surface, because these are subsided areas, actually uphill into rivers to be disposed of. In fact, some of these pumping systems are so large, they're moving about 40,000 liters per second, which is an amazing number to consider if you think about it. Another amazing number to consider is that Germany calls these pumping costs eternity cost. I mean, I guess the rest of us that are geologists know that eternity is something different than what we normally talk about from the political and economic standpoint, but still, they're not going to be able to stop pumping, and there is about $1 billion a year being spent on this pumping. It's both financed by the Ruhr-Kola, a special purpose entity that was started to amass money and realizing that this is going to be an ongoing problem, and then amended by money from the budget from the government of Germany. France is also struggling with surface flooding from coal mines in the Lorraine-Saar region, and mining has left problems very similar to that in the Ruhr area, but unfortunately it's progressing, and there's a new lake district forming on top of prime farmland. So we see something that is a very significant and unfortunate but real example of this nexus that we talk about between energy resource development, mine closures, and the food nexus and the other agricultural impacts. Next slide, please. Mine closure planning and funding for future environmental needs has to start when a mine opens. In fact, the mines should be open with the idea that they're going to be closed. Sustainable mine closures depend on coal, water, and methane resource management. I'm talking about coal mines here, but we just had a good example about uranium, which I'm quite familiar with. I started my career in uranium, and the ISL systems are very similar to those in South Texas in the United States. Mine restoration and mine land repurposing are crucial elements of resource management. But this happens after mines are closed, and of course, income has stopped. So you're left with sort of whatever has been set aside. Mine development plans should include these closure plans, and they should be reviewed periodically, because we all know that after you open a mine, you have plans, but plans have to adapt to the reality of geology and other mining conditions. So these are important that we keep these updated and really look ahead at what we'll be facing at the end of life for these mines. Funding mechanisms for closing mines needs to be revisited. We've started to do some work related to what this deficit might look like. We already know that multilateral and commercial banks and management investment funds are quickly backing away from, and in fact, many of them already have backed away from funding coal mine projects. This even includes not new coal mining, but cleaning up these problems. Surety bonding for mine.
Ray, apologies, I'm just reminding you of our time limits.
I have one more slide.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. And surety bonding for mine closure and restoration are found to be woefully inadequate. And in many coal mining areas, there are environmental disasters looming that are already in crisis mode. This is a crisis mode in terms of losing mining jobs, which are high paying, and trying to find something to substitute for those. This means mine land repurposing. Next slide, please. Several groups, such as the Global Energy Monitoring Group, are tracking coal mining and its emissions, and they're also looking downstream to the power production and publishing reports to bring more attention to the use of addressing problems. The Global Sustainability Standards Boards are supporting drafting a set of standards which encourage transparency. These are related to the extractive industries that we've already spoken about, this oil, gas, and coal sectors. And then we're going to hear on Friday from the IFRS, which is focusing more on the financial reporting aspects of sustainability. And finally, but not least, the World Bank is working on global mine closure standards and mine land repurposing tools. This work promotes good practices and risk-based best principles for sustainable closure practices. I'm a part of that team, and we're integrating that with best practices that we explore in the coal mine methane group of experts. And those are my brief remarks. And so with that, I'll leave it. And last slide, please. Please feel free to contact Michael Drabek, who's the secretary of our group, or me directly. Thank you again very much, and I turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ray. I believe I still have my role as a moderator.
Oh, sorry.
But no problem. Teresa can take it from me at any moment. And I see a very interesting comment from Teresa, actually, on what you just said. I would very much like to open a discussion on what we heard from our colleagues from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, and from you, Ray, but I don't think we have time unless Harry lets me do it, but I don't think he will. So we now
maybe you can take 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Then I think there were, let me go to the chat. and see what would be the most pressing questions. That was, let me go. I see questions from Ajoy Moitra. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. While exploring groundwater, factors related to contamination like arsenic and fluoride, a global concern, are taken into account. Does the exploration take measures to segregate contaminated groundwater aquifers by aquifer mapping, or take measures to bring down contamination to a safe level? Would any of our presenters like to respond to this question?
Boban, you're
yeah, maybe I can share my experience with the groundwater and problem of fluoride, for the example. We have generally very good quality of drinking water in the country because it is mostly caustic water, but in some rural areas there are some areas with fluoride in concentration more than 5 milligrams per liter, and it triggered very serious problems with the bones and the teeth and so other ills related with the fluoride concentration. But these days we have any measure to prevent it, because it happens in the rural areas. It's more or less in neighboring countries which share same geology, like Bosnia, for the example. Yes, this issue of fluoride, from my point of view, it's very important but not good addressed in many countries in the region. I prepare one study from one case study in Bosnia, and who is interested in this problematic about the fluoride contamination can send me a mail. I will be politely and send my working paper to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Boban. I think that's a very good response. I looked through the chat. Most of the messages there are comments congratulating our presenters with providing us with very good information, and I can only join them on that. So I think we can now go to the next part of the session. This is the work that we also have been doing last year and this year. It is directly related to the response to COVID-19. So this part of the session is called Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises and Resource Management in Response to COVID-19. And we have two speakers in this part of the session. The first one is Mr. Georgy Rudko, Chairman of the State Commission of Ukraine on Mineral Resources. And he will present the guidelines and best practices for MSMEs to assure resiliency and progress towards a circular economy in sustainable resource management and critical raw material supply chain solutions in Ukraine. Georgy, the floor is yours, and I would like to ask those of you who would like to listen to the English interpretation to switch to English in the appropriate box. It's at the bottom of the screen, and it says interpretation and has a globe. Georgy, слово вам. Спасибо.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen. I will share my presentation, and I will talk about the guidelines and the best practices for medium-sized and small enterprises to assure resilience and progress. And I will talk about the conditions of circular economy and also sustainable resource management and critical raw material supply chain solutions in Ukraine. Mineral resources are one of the most important topics in economy, and of course, it becomes more and more important as the time goes by. And resources are a factor of sustainability and safety, especially in the conditions of global crisis. Modern society is very deeply connected to these kinds of products, and these products are always connected to the minerals. The crisis of COVID-19 showed that we can break the global supply chains very quickly, and this situation is very difficult now, both in Ukraine and in the world. So we have conducted a study together with the UNECE, and this organization, as you know, is one of the partner that works on UNDA project, which is a global initiative about MMSP after COVID-19. And there are some strategic recommendations that were developed, taking into consideration the most important principles of UN organizations and the government of Ukraine, with the purpose of provision of the best conditions for sustainable economy and the restoration of supply chains in the world. Small and medium enterprises are important parts of our economy, and in our country, they represent more than 90% of all enterprises, and there are many employees that work in those companies, and they create the most important part of the national economy. There are some specific criteria, MMS, and they can be different in different countries. For example, you can divide them into different parts according to their size. And mineral resources, as I said, are very important in these conditions right now. There are some indicators which are very crucial right now. For example, there is always a risk of deficit, and economic importance is another important factor. Also, there is a supply risk and production growth, and also market dynamics. So we need to pay attention to these principles because these important parameters will help us support our life and support our economy in the world and on the national level. Here is the framework classification, UNFC, that was adopted in Ukraine. And UNFC is the foundation for global geopolitical forecasts on energy and mineral raw materials, and it is designed to satisfy the needs related to research on energy and mineral raw materials, resource management, corporate business processes, and financial reporting standards. You can see the graph on this page, and we can compare the numbers of different kinds of projects in our country and compare them in terms of geological knowledge and socioeconomic viability. Here you can see the metals like cobalt, nickel, and others, which are the most important minerals in our country. We are quite rich in this field. Ukraine has significant deposits of non-ferrous metals, but imports them in large quantities for its own needs. Explored deposits and ore occurrences are complex and concentrated, mainly within the Ukrainian shield. And these metals are extracted in very small quantities or not extracted at all at the moment. Also, Ukraine has some of the largest lithium deposits in Europe, which proved reserves and inferred resources. There are 2 explored deposits and 2 previously explored sites of lithium ore, as well as the number of lithium mineralization ore occurrences. So today, lithium is not extracted in Ukraine, and 1 deposit is licensed. let's look at other kinds of ores, beryllium, zirconium, and scandium. For example, these metals are quite rare. So rare and rare earth metals have been found in complex deposits and ore occurrences within the Ukrainian shield. Zirconium and scandium are concentrated in places and bedrock deposits in significant quantities. Their extraction is not underway. Reserves of tantalum, pentoxide, and niobium and beryllium have been estimated at 6 deposits, and Ukraine is one of the 10 leading countries in the world in terms of proved reserves of titanium ores, and it provides more than 6% of their global production. There are 27 deposits and more than 30 ore occurrences of various degree of geological knowledge. The main titanium containing mineral is ilmenite. And currently only placer deposits are being developed, which is about 10% of all explored reserves. And the other ones are in bedrock deposits now. Let's look at the supply risk of critical raw materials in Ukraine. Here is a table. So we divided them into 3 groups: low supply risk and medium supply risk and high supply risk. And also, let's talk about the supply of CRMs from secondary resources. So we use different materials. For example, we do recycling of vehicles and batteries, and recycling of photovoltaic modules, and recycling of aviation and electronic defense waste, recycling of glass, and it's shown on the slide. Then we reuse these resources. There are some trade barriers. It's difficult to reach international markets sometimes because there are measures related to standards that lead to high compliance costs, and state and commercial secrets and patent costs is another barrier. Also, the significant amount of the minimum consignment of critical raw materials is also very important. And we also have some logistics challenges, including customs requirements. Effective supply chain management is one of the crucial factors in maintaining and increasing revenues and competitiveness in current and future markets. A separate challenge for logistics was quarantine, which was introduced in March 2020 due to COVID-19. And for domestic enterprises, the formation of sustainable supply chains is a new area, but some of them have already taken effective practical steps in this direction. Enterprises need to respond to current changes and ensure that resources are properly allocated to support business activities. So this is the information about the logistics and supply chains in Ukraine. Also, I would like to show you some recommendations for MSMEs in Ukraine. First, Ukrainian entrepreneurs offer their recovery strategy and survival tactics for MSMEs, which include safety of employees and the continuous operation of the business, also development of new strategies, and some others. For example, it is important to improve access to finance. It's important to promote financial education programs focused on the demand of MSME entrepreneurs and improve the alternative non-bank and equity financing for MSMEs. We need to pay attention to public grants and use credit guarantee schemes as a risk-sharing mechanism. These are the most important recommendations in terms of access to finance in Ukraine. In order to mitigate the risks for MSMEs, we need to monitor the short-term liquidity and assess and anticipate financial and operational risks, create a contingency fund, track factors that may affect consumers, suppliers, contractors, and partners, and also develop and improve our employees' skills continuously. All of this will help us to mitigate the consumer demand risks. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Georgi. Thank you. The presentation was very good. And I would like to say that I really recommend to all of the colleagues, all the participants of today's meeting, to look at the primary source. The study that Georgi conducted with his colleagues, the information was very interesting and very useful, especially if we take into consideration today's conditions and circumstances. So even in general, this data about Ukraine is very useful and it can be used by everybody. And I think it can be used in other countries and other sectors too. It's especially important in terms of economy during the pandemic and recovery period. Thank you very much, Oleg. Thank you too. So the next colleague who will make a speech is our colleague from Tajikistan, Mr. Rahmatbek Bartavlatov, and he is the chairman of State Commission of Tajikistan on mineral resources or mineral reserves. Okay, I hope I'm saying that correctly. I'm sorry if I'm not saying it correctly. Thank you very much. The topic is the same, but it's about Tajikistan, Rahmanbek. So this is for you. Yes, dear colleagues, good afternoon. I listened to my colleague's presentation, Mr. Georgi Rutko, that was very important. So basically the topic is pretty much the same. It's not new for us, but it's very interesting. And we worked a lot here, and I would like to tell you shortly about the work that we have conducted. Next slide, please. The small and medium business makes it possible to realize an individual's creative abilities, entrepreneurship initiative, and creates a competitive environment which allows, with the existing variety of forms of ownership, to eliminate the shortage of many types of products to improve social relations. And however, several aspects of the problems of small and medium-sized businesses in the specific conditions of the transitional economy of Tajikistan remain insufficiently studied. State aid is effective only when it is based on a coherent system and consistent measures to support small and medium-sized businesses. And purposeful state support for small and medium-sized businesses is vital for the formation of market economy. Next slide, please. The government of the Republic of Tajikistan, with the development partners' participation, has initiated a comprehensive assessment of the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 to facilitate informed and targeted recovery responses. The purpose of the assessment was to understand the current medium and long-term impact of COVID-19 in all regions of the country on the life and well-being of the Republic of Tajikistan's population, as well on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. The international community has responded with humanitarian aid, soft loans, and grants. To support the economy in the context of the pandemic in May, the IMF allocated $189 million to Tajikistan under the mechanism of accelerated concessional lending for 10 years, with a 5-year grace period. And the balance of Tajikistan's debt to the fund at the beginning of 2020 was about $30 million. Tajikistan was also among 25 countries in globally, and IMF has facilitated the payment of debts by providing grants for 2 years. And we suffered from the pandemic a lot, and unfortunately we have some delays in supply chains, and it is very important for our country. We need to keep our employees, and one of the main challenges in our company is exactly this. Another challenge is the compensation of non-payments due to delays and fulfillment of longer-term supply contracts due to the non-delivery of raw materials. The most common negative impacts of the MSMEs firms is inability to pay off loans, pay taxes, produce goods for services at pre-COVID-19 levels, scale up businesses, and pay workers' salaries. For example, more than 25% of MSMEs reported difficulties in repaying loans, and 23% of MSMEs experienced difficulties in paying taxes regularly, which indicates how liquidity of funds for most surveyed MSMEs. And COVID-19 outbreak has temporarily disrupted relationships between the companies and buyers, suppliers, customers, markets. A total of 31.7% of MSMEs whose supply chains were affected said their production was disrupted. This means that offices, workshops, and factories have been closed since May 2020. Access to resources was also limited. Many enterprises faced severe logistical problems, which in turn led to restrictions on access to transport services within the country and in the region. Besides, sales were understandably disrupted due to the temporary closure of local bazaars and markets and international trade restrictions. In terms of value chains, 41% of affected MSMEs reported an interruption in customer relationship, and 16% of these companies reported limited access to local markets like bazaars, grocery stores, and so on. And 13% of MSMEs said they have difficulty finding or purchasing materials from affiliates or contractors, suppliers, and sellers throughout the company. And during the pandemic, all the borders were closed, so the Republic was completely closed, and it was a big problem for us. So it unfortunately disrupted the work of our companies a lot. A significant part of the financial industry can also find positive aspects of today's development of events. The macroeconomic forecast for 2021 of the Eurasian Development Bank reports that economic growth of Tajikistan will be 6.1%. According to the EDB forecast, Tajikistan's economy will grow by 6.1% in 2021, and a full recovery of GDP to the pre-crisis level of the fourth quarter of 2019 will occur only in Kazakhstan. And the member states' aggregated GDP will decrease by 4% at the end of 2020 after growing by 1.7% a year earlier. State support of the economy in Tajikistan is relatively small and amounts to about 2.5% of GDP. This is due to the Republic's limited fiscal reserves. Compared to 2019, where the economy grew by 7.5%, the Tajik economy's growth in 2020 will be 4.5%. In 2021, the economy will receive support from remittances from labor migrants as the economy will recover in donor states, primarily in Russia. So during the pandemic, we work quite well, and the borders are now open. So we have migrants working in Russia and other countries as well. So we hope that they will send some money to the country. So there will be some transactions and we will get some support this way. You can see this slide. In Tajikistan, we have a program assessment program. And this program is the study and assessment of reserves of rare metals for 2016-2026, and it was approved by the government. The program analyzed the current state of geological exploration of the entire territory in the Republic. And we hope that we will find new metals in the country, and we hope that by the end of this program, we will find new locations, new spots, and we will start exploration by that time. In the short term, the scale of support MSMEs from the government of the Republic of Tajikistan largely depends on the total size of the state budget, on monetary and fiscal policy instruments, as well as on various indirect indicators such as GDP per capita, which are a vital factor determining the government of the Republic of Tajikistan's ability to provide adequate support to business without resorting to external official development assistance. I can underline the following state here. Nowadays, we are trying to develop a new tax code in the country, and it will help us to attract investors and develop our work further. So, yes, we also have the debt management strategy for 21-23, and we hope that the Tajik economy will gradually return in 2021-22, and this scenario assumes vaccines availability, a more robust regional economy, and recovery in remittances and international trade.
Next slide, please.
I would like to tell you that the development of small business and creating a mechanism and instrument of state support for the Small Business Acts naturally is one of the strategic directions of market reforms. And we need to facilitate the procedures in our country. And we are trying to do many things in our country to simplify all the processes, to facilitate the trade area. And I hope that in the nearest future, we will try to recover from the pandemic. In Tajikistan right now, the situation is not so bad in terms of pandemic, so I hope that it won't block us anymore. And using the platform that we are working on now, I would like to mention that we use actually, the previous presenter said that they use the Soviet system, and we have a similar system about reserve calculation. And we are trying to prepare all the necessary documents and legislation, but adapt them to the international standards. And also, we use macro analysis programs, and we are trying to implement the modern international programs to calculate the reserves. And I think that if we continue working according to the international standards, we will facilitate and fasten our work. And there are huge opportunities in Tajikistan because there are good minerals and there are many of them, and we've shown all this information in our reports, and you can use this report, find it on the site of UNECE, and the detailed information is available in our detailed presentation and report on the website. If you have further questions, we will be happy to answer your questions, and we are always happy to cooperate with all of you and international organizations, and this way we can develop our country, because a lot of things were done in Soviet times in Tajikistan, that's true. And as I said, that we have great resources. As you know, 93% of our territory is covered with mountains. Obviously, we have a lot of minerals, but they are on different stages of development and exploration right now. And I hope that in the future, we will receive more finances, more investments, and we will have a chance to develop the economy of the country. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rahmanbek. It was a great presentation, and soon we will announce your study on the project's website, and it will be published in Russian and English languages. So we will be very happy if the participants and the colleagues read this study, so they will be able to see the situation in Tajikistan and your comments.
We do not have time for questions and answers. There was a question addressed to Georgi Rudko related to photovoltaic waste and the role of Msmes in Ukraine in its recycling and processing. Georgi did respond to it. So if you're interested, please take a look in the chat. He says that there are some small companies, but the amounts processed and recycled are very small. I now give the moderator baton back to Teresa. Teresa, I hope I didn't encroach too much on your authority. I really enjoyed moderating this session. Very interesting, very informative. Teresa, please. Thank you.
So, Oleg, thank you. It was a pleasure to share the moderation with you. No problem. So now I would, before introducing our keynote speaker, I would like to ask you all some patience, because we need to take the session a little bit 20 or 25 minutes more, as we are late, as you already noticed. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker, which will talk to us about climate change and the oil and gas industry, a transition to a zero carbon world. It is Robert Barons from Queensland University. I must share with you that Rob has delivered a number of lectures to the expert group Resource Management, and we are delighted to welcome him back for this exciting keynote. Rob is currently a professor of technology management and strategy at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. Rob, the floor is yours, and thank you for coming.
Teresa, thank you very much. It's my absolute pleasure to be giving this keynote today. And I very much regret that I can't be in Geneva. Geneva is a city that never disappoints at any time. But at this time of year, I find it particularly beautiful. And it would take a global pandemic and the cessation of most international travel to keep me away from Geneva at this time of year. But unfortunately, that's exactly where we find ourselves. I want to talk to you today, as Teresa indicated, about climate change in the oil and gas industry. And there are basically two key parts that I want to draw your attention to here. First of all, is I'll put in front of you some confronting evidence that reminds us of the fact that even though we've heard a lot of exciting testimonial and there's a lot of great work that's happening that is going to help us on our journey in delivering on the promise of green and clean energy technologies, the transition is not happening as quickly as many of us were hoping it would. And a consequence of that is that we have to make sure that we're kind of doing our level best to try to think about carbon mitigation and carbon management also for the legacy energy assets that we have. So I'll be kind of investing the first half of the presentation talking about that. And I have great news for the second half, and that I will be giving what's basically tantamount to an update, a status update on where are we with new digital technologies that show tremendous promise in aiding and abetting our attempts to help with managing climate change, specifically with the oil and gas industry. Harry, advance to the next slide, please. just a tipping of my hat to some research collaborators that I've been working with. A lot of the ideas and the themes that I'll be talking about here, even though I'm the one doing the talking today, these are based on many discussions that I've had with folks from the Intel Corporation and also from PwC, the global consulting company. Next slide, Harry. So basically, kind of let's talk about, here's a snapshot of what the energy mix of the world looks like more or less these days. This is this data that I'm presenting here is from as recently as a year ago. And among the things that we should be very pleased with, if we look on the right-hand side of this figure here, is that we see that the share of the overall energy mix that comes from renewables, we see that climbing very aggressively, very quickly. That's that orange line at the bottom of the right-hand side of the figure here. And that's what we were all hoping for. Now, but there's also some other news that we need to get on the table here. And that is that when we kind of look at how the other energy sources, the legacy ones, the ones that for decades we have relied on, like oil, like gas, we see that even though proportionally oil has kind of dropped in terms of what fraction of the overall energy mix comes from oil, we still see that in absolute exajoules delivered to the market, that's that green wedge on the left-hand side. We see that the absolute amount of oil delivered into the marketplace has not only, it's not level, it's still increasing. And natural gas is growing even faster than that. So there can be little doubt that oil and gas are going to be with us for at least the short to medium term future. Harry, next slide. And that is kind of crystallized into the following sound bites that we see from the International Energy Agency's most recent energy outlook. Yes, of course, they're very excited about the rise of solar and wind, et cetera. I don't think anyone is discouraging the arrival and the proliferation of these technologies, but the emerging consensus is that it's a little bit too soon to be talking about the absolute demise or the snuffing out of oil. It's going to be with us for quite some time yet. And that is even more true for natural gas, which is considered by many to be a transition fuel as we move to green and clean tech. Next slide, Harry. And that basically brings about a logical consequence of those things is this, that if we want to have a serious conversation about carbon mitigation, about achieving our climate goals, then those goals are not going to be at all within our reach if we're not also, in tandem to the new technology discussion, we also must be discussing the existing infrastructure, the legacy energy system that we have, that we've had for many decades. We're going to have to address how are we going to work towards carbon mitigation with those as well. Next slide. Okay, so let's just talk about what that energy, that legacy system looks like. And it also kind of puts into focus for us what is the size of the prize that we're talking about here. So this figure that I'm showing here, this is kind of the overall snapshot of where the global emissions come from or came from as recently as 2015. And basically what you see here kind of in that dark blue part towards the top of the figure is that this is the total greenhouse gas emission contribution that comes from the oil and gas sector. Now, the northeast quadrant part of that, the 33%, that comes from the using of fossil fuels, the using of oil and gas, the burning of them to create energy. Okay, now that's kind of to supplant that, to replace that or minimize it, that's going to be left in the hands of the people who consume these products. Okay, so that's really not what I'm focusing on here. What I do want to draw your attention to here is in the northwest corner, we've got that 8 and the 1, which adds up to 9, of course. So 9% of all the global greenhouse gas emissions come directly from the oil and gas industry. That is to say, this is the levers that they pull, this is the buttons that they push. So the oil and gas industry can directly control that 9%. And that's the 9% that I'm zooming in on with this talk. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the breakdown of exactly where these greenhouse gas contributions come from. When we kind of look at the spectrum, the soup to nuts breakdown of all of the different ways that greenhouse gases are emitted into the atmosphere, we see there's a bit of a mix here. We see CO2 at various parts of the process. CO2 is spat into the air. We see activities like flaring. We see here hydrogen production downstream, but there's this one very conspicuous baby blue chunk here that's 47%, almost half of the entire life cycle greenhouse gas emissions comes from this one curious section here called fugitive emissions or venting of methane. And I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about why that particular category is as big as it is. Next slide. That can be explained with two things here. First of all, we have to remember that a ton of emitted gas is not the same whether it's methane or CO2. The truth of the matter is that methane is at least 28 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than is carbon dioxide. 28 at a minimum, and there are estimates that it can be even more potent than that. So that's why it has this very outsized role, this outsized presence in when we kind of consider together all of the greenhouse gas emissions. Methane really stands out as a huge part of that problem. And I've also got, towards the top of the figure here, I've also got a recent headline from only a few weeks ago from the Financial Times of London, telling us that the methane pollution is starting to soar. In this particular article, they were talking about the US with shale drilling, but I want to emphasize that just because that particular story was about the US, this is not isolated to the US. This is very much a global thing. But what I do want to draw your attention to there is that that the methane pollution levels are actually on the rise as the energy production has kind of bounced back in the post-COVID era, where we're turning the corner so that COVID's a little more behind us than it was. As the energy production is increasing, we are seeing that there is this significant growth in the amount of the methane that is being released into the atmosphere. And so that outsized chunk of the entire life cycle greenhouse gas emissions that the oil and gas industry was creating, it's in recent history, it's actually got a little bit worse. And this kind of emphasizes something that we already knew, that we already knew we had to be focusing on it. We had to be managing this. And what this shows us is that we have to do even better than that. We have to get very concerned about this because recently it got a little bit worse. Next slide. So basically, I've got this, the title of this slide talks about the other challenge. So we know what the challenge is. We know that in the long term, in the big picture, what we need to do is to take the global economy, take our resource system, and kind of move things to a place where green and clean tech is ubiquitous and everywhere. And I think we all get it. We all understand that that's the challenge. But the other challenge is while we are moving to that utopian future, we also have to be managing the legacy assets that we have. And just because of how slow it's taking us to turn this corner, we're going to have to, if we're going to have any serious shot at making things okay with our overall carbon mitigation strategy, we're going to have to devote significant time and energy and resources to managing the CO2 and methane outputs of the oil and gas industry. And so the question then is, what technologies, most specifically digital technologies, what can we bring to bear that will help us to achieve that? Next slide, please. Now, the great news here is that I think some of the heavy lifting is already done. We can significantly piggyback on some of the new design principles and approaches to engineering that have been unfolding in the oil and gas industry for the last few decades. The oil and gas sector has been working towards this concept of smart fields, and it kind of happened in fits and starts and with slightly different nomenclature and different oil and gas companies around the world. But there was basically this idea took root of smart fields, or I worked for Shell for many years. And so we called it smart fields there. It was called iFields at Chevron, digital oil field of the future at BP, et cetera. So this is, even though I'm kind of applying, I suppose, more Shell friendly terminology there, it was a concept that most oil and gas companies grabbed onto. And so basically, we've kind of seen that this digital smart fields technology, these design principles and this philosophy, that this has been kind of getting absorbed throughout the industry for the last 20 years or so. So like I said, a lot of the heavy lifting is already done now, but here's where things are going to be a little bit different. Historically, the real motives, if we could be completely honest with ourselves about what was driving the absorption of this design change in the oil and gas sector, it was really driven by the pursuit of operational efficiencies and cost savings, delivering more barrels and making those barrels happen faster, cheaper, et cetera. Now, we can take those design philosophies, however, and we can kind of repurpose them so that we can kind of focus more on emissions and being greener. Next slide, please. One of the other big technological shifts that we see happening is that there's this this impressive shift towards the Internet of Things, okay? And one of the things that's driving that in the marketplace is we're seeing a precipitous decline in the price of sensor technology. Now, basically what that allows us to do is put our finger on the pulse of the patient and kind of build a bridge between the physical world and the digital world. And so we can kind of measure whatever technical parameter we wanted to keep our eye on. What's the flow rate over there? What's the temperature over there? What's the pressure in that manifold? We can basically pick whatever technical parameter we want to measure at any point in the system. And for what is a reasonable and very affordable amount of money, we can now measure it, and we can record that data and share it with any stakeholder that might care about it. And what this does for us is it gives us a much greater degree of enterprise-wide visibility and transparency so that everybody in the system is able to basically look at what is happening at any point in the technical system that we're talking about. Next slide, please. Another big important development that I'm excited to tell you about today is that we're seeing more and better penetration of edge computing. Now, let me just kind of explain what I mean by edge computing. This is basically we're kind of moving the computation functions to the edge of the network, that is to say, closer to where the data is being collected. If we kind of think about the smart fields paradigm or the intelligent oil fields paradigm that we've been developing over the last couple of decades, really a lot of that was about collecting data at the wellhead or wherever the production was happening. And then the data would usually get sent to some cloud type of environment, and then calculations would happen, and then the results of those calculations would eventually find their way back to the operational area where this stuff was happening. And then we were there was always this latency or this lag, this time lag between when an event happened and when we got feedback on that event. Now, the bad news there is that sometimes this meant that we were not able to optimize in what would be a helpful time frame, or we couldn't optimize in real time. And that would prevent us sometimes from being on top of situations where we could have stopped an emission from happening. But with edge computing, it helps us to reduce that latency. It gets rid of a lot of that time lag. And why that is extremely beneficial in this context is it means that the system overall will be much better at reacting much sooner to emission type of situations. So instead of just finding out after the fact, geez, we really should have been on top of that. We could have managed it differently here and here. If only we had that information at the time. Now we have that information, the calculations that we need to make that more informed choice, that's right in your hand, right out of the blocks. And also by having the calculations happening where the production is happening, it also makes the whole thing simpler to audit. Next slide, Harry. And that brings me to this. We've seen over the last couple of years the emergence of a global data standard called the Open Footprint Forum. Just a few words about what that's about. What this allows us to do is it's basically a framework for sharing information, a protocol, if you will. It's an architecture for how we think and talk about and categorize emissions. And it was kind of originally designed for all kinds of industries, but it's been specifically absorbed and is being used extensively by the oil and gas sector. Many international oil companies, many national oil companies, most service companies, and lots of digital vendors have all piled in. And so this has kind of become, I think it's fair to say, this is kind of the standard for this. And what this allows us to do now is have a shared language within the entire industry and a framework for being able to share data, and companies can work together to make sure that, again, soup to nuts, that we are able to kind of let the data flow throughout the entire value network from one company to the next, and make sure that we are able to measure very accurately and very carefully exactly where emissions are happening. And it's by having that greater degree of transparency and visibility, that's how we're going to manage this better in the future. Next slide. I think I'm just about out of time. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share these ideas with you and to bring you up to speed with some of these technological developments. It's been my absolute pleasure. If you have any questions, I'll do my level best to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for your very, very interesting presentation and enlightening us in our work and putting very interesting questions. I don't know if, Harry, could you help me? Do you have any time for questions? Harry?
Harry, you're muted.
Hi, Teresa, it's Charlotte. I think we've got time for a few questions from the chat.
Okay.
So there was
yes.
Yeah. Okay. There's a good questions and comments about the higher global warming potentials for methane. I think Ray Pilcher shared some comments there.
Yes, maybe Robert, if you could see the questions, or do you want me to read them?
Okay, I see that we've got one question about higher GWPs for methane are related to the time horizon used. We should use the 20-year time horizon to more accurately portray methane's impact. So again, I offered, I don't know exactly if you think that should be revising the potency of methane, if that should be revising it up or down. What I did present in the presentation there was I said it was a range. I believe I said it was between, basically based on a few sources that I put forward there, it was between 28 and 80 times the greenhouse gas potency of CO2. So what I'm not clear from Ray's question in the chat room is whether they're arguing that it should be turned up a notch or turned down a notch. But what is manifestly obvious by the fact that I put forward a range is that there is certainly room for some disagreement about exactly what that multiplier is.
May I respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, thank you, Professor Perrins. That was a great presentation. My point is that because we're involved in methane emissions reductions, that when you look at the 20-year time horizon, the average on that 20 years is 84. And when at the moment it's released, it's 120 times that of CO2. So, and it only lasts in the atmosphere for about 12 years. At that point, there's like way less than 1% of the original pulse left. So we really need to be taking advantage of that in terms of both our understanding of its impact, but also the potential for leveraging that to make quick gains. And of course, the oil and gas industry recognizes this, the coal industry not so much, and then other sources of methane even less. So anyway, that was my point, not to be critical, just to say that's where we probably should be heading. Yeah, thank
Absolutely. You. And Ray, I don't at all object to people kind of adding on a very important and materially relevant bits of the science as we go through this. It's only by putting these bits of science together that we're going to crack the big nut.
Yes, thank you.
So I don't know if we have any more questions.
We don't seem to have any more questions. Yeah.
I would like to put a quick question, if possible. So, Robert, how you talked, you ended your presentation with the crucial need of standardization of data. That's what we feel, but the way to move to the standardization is very difficult. In your opinion, how could in your expertise, how could you help us accelerate the push for this standardization?
Right. Well, thank you. That's a very good question. I think that what's happening in a scenario like that, and I'm kind of abstracting this to the level of talking about dominant designs that emerge in a marketplace, be it, computer operating systems, or, whether we're talking about Betamax versus VHS. So I'm kind of abstracting it to the level of the dominant design discussion. Now, typically what you're looking for is a scenario where many of the companies in that market ecosystem are kind of converged on a single solution. A tipping point can happen, and then everybody starts rallying around a particular technical solution because it's the language that everybody is speaking now. Think of, for example, when we had that rivalry between HD DVD and Blu-ray, when you went back to a Blockbuster store back in the the late 90s, right? We had like these two options that were available, and then all of a sudden Blu-ray became the standard. There was the war was over. There was a tipping point that was reached. Okay, and I think the good news here is that Blu-ray moment of victory, I think it's safe to say that it's kind of arrived here. What we've seen is that the overwhelming majority of the industry has rallied around this particular standard. And so the question of how can we get this standard to win and be successful, I think that's kind of been decided for us. The tipping point has happened, and all that any other company has to do now is just kind of reach out and grab it. Let me also say that, this is an open source standard, and so it's not held as proprietary secret. Yeah. This stuff is available on the website. You can reach out and grab it. And if you want to participate in this network, all the digital resources that you need to play are right there on the website.
So we need to spread out the message very heavily, very strongly. So thank you very much for your very interesting presentation and very enlightening, as I already said.
Yeah, one moment. Teresa, Yang Hua wanted to talk. I will just see whether she wants.
Oh, okay. I couldn't see.
She raised her hand. Yang Hua, do you want to make a comment from your side? You can unmute and talk if you. Okay, we will take up Yang Hua in subsequent session. So yeah, I think she's unable to connect now.
So Harry, can I move on or?
Yeah, you can move on. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So,
thank you.
Thank you again to Professor Robert Behrens. I will move on to the adoption of conclusions and recommendations. And I will read these recommendations so that you can comment on them. The experts group noted with appreciation the ongoing extra budgetary projects that support the application of UNFC, in particular, the European Commission funded project to support UNECE member states in development and implementation of UNFC and UNRMS. And second, the integrated energy and water resource management in support of sustainable development in Southeast Europe and Central Asia, funded by the United Nations Development Account. So, any comment on this?
Yes, if I may. It's more of an editorial or terminological issue. The United Nations Development Account projects are not extra budgetary. They are from the regular budget. We can work on that. I would consider that editorial. I'm just pointing it out that it needs to be changed. Maybe just to say the ongoing projects that support the application of UNFC, and then there is one extra budgetary project indeed, and there is a UNDA project.
Thank you. Comment taken, and we will correct. Thank you very much. Harry?
Yeah, it is corrected. We will. I will also like to mention that we will hear about the case studies from Europe in the afternoon session on Friday, session 10. Today we have heard a lot from the UNDA and RPTC funded projects, but more is coming soon. So please log in to that respective sessions to hear about this wonderful case studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. So now it's my turn to thank all our speakers in this session with such an interesting cases and experience from several countries, and ended with this excellent keynote speech. And I would like to ask you, or to please ask you to join us for the session 4 that is going to take place this afternoon. It's about new UNFC specifications to support COVID green recovery and environmental and social governance investments. The session will start at 3 p.m. Geneva, 2 o'clock in United Kingdom and Portugal. So it will take place on Zoom platform. I should thank now all interpreters for the very good job done, and see you in the afternoon.
Teresa,
or in the evening.
If I may, just a very brief note that this session and the session yesterday afternoon, and there will be 4 more sessions during this week that are arranged under the framework of the United Nations Development Account project that I reported on today. And I would also like to thank our colleagues from UNDP Istanbul Regional Hub for helping us with the Zoom connection and with interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleg. It was a very good combination of us two. Thank you. So now it will be the time to say goodbye and see you in session 4. Thank you.